introduce Steve Tromans, Daniel S. Martin, Becky Lockett and Mike Bethel.
Because the theme of this evening is experimental music and spoken word is very obvious, but experimental music is something that, you know, has a reasonably recent history, not as long as all that. If you go back to the 1940s, 1950s, I guess if you're going to name somebody, it would be John Cage, the American composer, who everyone seems to remember as the guy who did the silent piece, that is not actually a silent piece, it's actually a noise piece. John Cage wrote this piece, the first performance in 1952 lasted exactly 4 minutes 33 seconds and was in 3 movements, and it featured David Tudor, who was a renowned and exceptional pianist, interpreter of contemporary music, and he walked on stage and didn't play anything for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. But it was in 3 movements because he like lifted the lid of the piano and closed it, lifted and closed it, whatever. And everyone sort of knows that, but like a few years back, I found out that the very first performance of Premiere was actually in Woodstock, and it was in a theatre that was, the back of which was open to the forest. So the whole audience heard the forest sounds, and that was the whole point of that particular piece. Unintentional sounds, all the sounds around us. So John Cage was always like quite happy to hear, you know, all the stuff that would annoy you if you're trying to make some music and like a siren, you know, some kind of police car went past. He was happy with all of that. And he made a very, he went to Darmstadt in West Germany at the time, which is like a top sort of like institute for contemporary music. And he said to them, you know, sort of jokingly but also seriously, what is more musical, a truck driving past a factory or a truck driving past a music school? So that was kind of his, like, you know, his kind of way. Anyway, the reason I mentioned John Cage, obviously, is the godfather of experimental music, but in the 50s, he got into this idea of composing and performing music through the use of chance operations, which is called aleatoric music. So it would be like the toss of a coin or the roll of some dice. And so, in preparation for this, I was kind of thinking, I want to do something different. I want to do something new. I mean, everyone knows me, if they know me at all, as a piano player, keyboard player, sometimes a melodica player. So I want to do something with like a laptop, nice one, mate, and various things. And I dug out my old 20-sided die from the Warhammer Games Workshop days. And so what I've done is I've like, for my own sort of part here, I've like, there are various things I'm going to do, don't read too much about this, it's all musical, on the roll of the die. So if you see me rolling the die here, that's what's going on, actually. One of them at one point was going to be drink a bit of a pint, but I finished my pint, so that was off the cards. So before we actually start, Danny, would you like to say anything about what you read, or would you want to just dive straight in?
Well, the title of the piece is The Man in the Lake, and I think we should just go straight from there.
Let's do it, man. Let's dive into that lake.
The Man in the Lake. The man was found floating in the lake by some local kids. They were in therapy until the age of 25. Poor things. Strange how something like that can change someone, although not entirely surprising. I wouldn't call it growing up. It happened far too quickly for that. And it wasn't growing up for those kids. That's not what growing up should be. Finding a dead man in a lake, floating on the surface, like a twig, discarded from a tree on a windy day. I've heard some say that happening to them made them better people in the long run. That somehow, having been forced to grow up by that dead man, improved their character, their sense of self, their understanding, I guess. But what do I know? The police didn't come to ask if I'd seen anything that night, if I had any idea who the dead man in the lake was. No. After all, there was only a clear view of the whole lake I had from the window of my lonely house on the hill. Perhaps that's all I needed, to tell them that I didn't know him, couldn't tell them his name, that I just heard their screams echoing across the surface of the lake, and looked out to see him floating as they found him, just floating. Perhaps I saw him from the window. I looked down across the lake and saw him, alone, just him, with the lake and the trees and the cool night wind. Perhaps I'm asking you to consider this just for a moment, that he died alone, that he was okay with that to die as he did was what he wanted. The police could sum up the man and his death in one word: misadventure. That was all. Somehow he had got into that lake, and he wasn't ever coming back out. That should have been that. Should have. Could have. I guess it's only natural. We live. Our children grow up, die, and then we move on. Just like that. It's strange to have to talk about him, to feel like we must, to feel a sense of justice. For who? Who do we want this justice for? The dead can't have anything anymore. If I'd seen him being killed, stumbling into that lake like a drunk, or whatever else, and did nothing, well, what then? What then? What's the sense of justice in that case? For all you know, I could have held him under that water myself, in the shadow parts of that lake, kept him beneath the waves as he fought for his life, desperately clinging on, only for a few moments more. What does that do for justice? I wonder. You haven't been at my windowsill. What could the view be like? How could you know? Right. Perhaps, just maybe, I know everything, and you know nothing. In town, something took hold of the town when that man came from the lake. Those waters rested about them and lingered like a great pressure building upon their minds. They couldn't just let him go into that grave. They just wouldn't let the dead man sleep. Yet it wasn't for his sake. No, not at all. They weren't going to find him, his name, so that he may rest peacefully. God no. That wasn't what held them so tight. It wasn't about the dead man in the lake, only the fact that he was dead. Into that grave he went, yet every morning someone would go in and quiz the police on his death. What did he die of? Who killed him? Why did he die? They would be shooed away, but come afternoon, in someone else would come, asking all the same questions. Then someone else at tea time, concerned fathers and anxiety-ridden mothers, old women, unemployed, middle-aged men, the local newspaper and the school-run monthly. In came people from out of town who had heard about the dead man from their gossiping postman, having felt sorry for those poor kids. On and on they came, obsessed. That's all it was, an obsession. The local kids. They'd grown quiet, withdrawn. All of them had. The school scrambled to try and accommodate them. But how much could they do? Not often do kids leave school on Friday, only to come back after the weekend, having stared into the cold eyes of a dead man. Frozen features and locked limbs of someone no longer there. They drifted classroom to classroom. Even now, when those local kids are praised for their strength of character, they can't help but see his pale, absent eyes. The man. They aren't kids. Not now. They're old. Older. The ages their parents were once. Yet still, they see that lake. You want to know something? Sometimes I think about them as they were when they found him. Their voices, how they echoed across the lake, echoed into the night, reverberating, repeating, dying away. And I could see them from my window. Could you imagine? Just picture it. And all these years, all this time, I wanted to go down to them, say something to them. But then I think, what would I say? What could I say? Nothing would make it better. Not now. They didn't need to see that. To find him. To become who they are today. That place doesn't exist. And none of this was destined to happen. It was just how it happened. It just was. The community centre. A majority of the town booked out the community centre on Saturday night. The mood of the room hadn't been too volatile, starting out. But half an hour in, the descent began. Yet they had begun with the nameless man. There was a sense of mourning. Each of the gathered spoke in turn, in quiet, respectful tones, and their thoughts lingered on him. Him. A single mother of three told the hall of how she couldn't help thinking about her own son. How, if he had gone as that man had, and she spent the rest of her life oblivious to that, she would be miserable. Far past mere misery or depression, she would border on madness. As someone spoke, everyone listened, respectfully, with the good courtesy their community valued. It was quite the show. To be part of the audience was a joy. No one had seen me come in, or noticed me at the back of the hall. Shadows gathered about the edges of the community centre, and that's where I hid. Covering my mouth with a hand. I couldn't help it. Then, the town, talking as they did, about the man from the lake. I was smirking, out from those shadows. I was trying my hardest not to laugh, not to make a sound too loud. And I listened and watched. They came back to questioning the police, with no one to answer. All the same questions, asked the same as they were before, over and over again. A chorus of concern, expressed as true and genuine. Their voices began to echo about the hall, radiate through the walls so that the community centre glowed. A great, shining beacon from the very centre of the town, marking them, placing them. A magnificent call out into the world, to space, to someone, to God, that here is a town concerned about the possibility of death, because a man had died in their midst. A man no one knew, who drowned in the lake 10 minutes out of town. I suppose all they wanted were answers. Just that simple. Answers. I guess they were scared, as anyone would be when someone dies. They were alive once, like we are now, right now. How could someone just not be anymore? The descent. But that chorus grew stronger, louder and louder. The town gathered in that community centre, no longer discussing their worries respectfully. They shouted, screamed at each other. The postman collapsed, falling from his chair and cowering. The couple that ran the club went to close with a handful of teachers. After all, what do these teachers know? How do they protect the children? The milkman took out chugs of milk, drowning one after the other and raving about cows. How perfectly simple is the cow? He screamed. We should worship the cows that provide such a rejuvenating liquid as milk. The window was smashed. The walls of the community centre with a face. The fire started. Hard to tell how or from where. Bright flames engulfed the hall. Smoke gathered about the ceiling. The wall would come down, and I'd watch the community centre collapse. I would stand in the street and watch as the town pours out from the centre, out onto the streets, spilling forth with fury and anger. And some sort of purpose. They marched, they rallied, they rioted, they fought with each other, cried together and made love in the road. They burned suburbs to the ground, marching their way closer and closer to the high street, to the centre of the town. They wouldn't let themselves be stopped. As one, they descended upon all. Burned cars, destroyed churches, some wrecked where they'd be working in a few short days. When the weekend was over, when the riot was over. Amongst them, I walked, lurked, watched, and I just couldn't help myself. I laughed so much, my ribs hurt. Tears came to my eyes. By the time the high street was overrun and the police had gone into hiding, my vision was blurred by tears. Endless streams of tears. My body grew weak, my limbs heavy, and all I could do was fall to the ground, with the town burning around me. I cried. The man. He's been lost. The man who died in the lake. I can almost see him now as I look out across the rippling surface, faintly obscured by a cold fog. See him as I first saw him, when I heard that shrill scream of those local kids whose life was never the same. He bobs, he floats, he glides in the water. No one could just leave him be in that wordless grave. What if that's all he wanted? What if that's why he went into those waters? Perhaps that's all he wanted, to sing. I see you. I hear you. I understand you. Sleep, friend. I'll let you sleep.
It's break time.